I opened my eyes to the smell of cheap coffee and the fluorescent hum of the prison visitation room, and I knew with absolute certainty I was 23 again. The realization didn't come gradually. It hit me all at once, like stepping from a dark room into blinding sunlight. One moment I was dying, shackled to a hospital bed in FCI Dublin, my body ravaged by stage 4 ovarian cancer, my lungs barely pulling in air. The next moment I was here, in this room I remembered with perfect, horrible clarity, sitting across from Detective Morrison with his sharp eyes and his cheap tie and his folder full of lies. I looked down at my hands pressed flat against the metal table. They were young, smooth. No scars from 15 years of prison labor, no arthritis from sleeping on concrete slabs, no liver spots or tremors. I flexed my fingers and felt strength I hadn't possessed in decades. My body felt different, lighter, stronger, present in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on my frame, size medium. In my first life, my previous life, my dead life, I'd needed an XL after years of starchy commissary food and depression eating. But this body was still my 23-year-old body, the one that still went to the gym 3 times a week, that still believed in taking care of itself because it had a future. Across from me, Detective Morrison slid a document across the table. His face was unlined, his hair still dark brown without any gray. I'd watched him go gray over the years of my first life. He'd been promoted to lieutenant eventually, had testified at 2 other cases where I'd been in the courtroom for some administrative hearing or another. He'd never looked at me with anything but contempt. "Miss Chen," he said now in the exact same tone he'd used the first time. "This is your last chance. Sign the confession and the DA will recommend 20 years instead of life. Your lawyer thinks it's a good deal. Hell, I think it's a good deal, considering what you did." I stared at the document. The confession. I could see my name already typed in. Emily Chen, age 23. Accused of embezzling $4.2 million from Chen and Foster Financial Services client trust accounts. In my first life, I'd signed it. I'd been terrified, exhausted. They'd kept me in interrogation for what felt like days, though I learned later it had only been 14 hours. Detective Morrison and his partner, a woman named Hughes who smiled sympathetically while Morrison played bad cop, had taken turns. They'd shown me evidence, printouts of transactions with my login credentials, copies of authorization forms with my signature, photographs of ledgers with my fingerprints. "We have you dead to rights," Morrison had said. "The evidence is overwhelming. Your business partner gave a statement. She said you'd been acting strange, secretive. She said you were the only one with access to these accounts." I'd tried to explain about my mother, about being at the hospital, about how I couldn't possibly have made those transactions because I'd been holding my dying mother's hand. "That's what they all say," Detective Hughes had replied gently. "They all have an excuse, but the evidence doesn't lie, Emily. Your fingerprints, your signatures, your login credentials, what are we supposed to think?" And I'd been so tired, so broken. My mother had died 6 days before. I'd barely slept since. I couldn't think straight. They kept saying the evidence was overwhelming, that I'd be convicted anyway, that if I just signed the confession, I could get a better deal. So I'd signed. 20 years, the DA had recommended. I'd served 15 before the cancer killed me. 15 years in a 6x8 cell, eating terrible food, watching my youth disappear, dying by inches in a place that smelled like despair and industrial cleaner. But that was my first life. This was my second chance. I looked up at Detective Morrison. "I need to see my lawyer. I'm not signing anything." His jaw tightened. A muscle twitched near his eye. "Miss Chen, don't be stupid. We have you dead to rights. Your fingerprints are on the ledgers. Your signature is on the authorization forms. Your computer access codes were used to make the transfers. Your business partner has already given a statement. She's cooperating fully. If you don't take this deal, then I'll go to trial," I said. My voice came out stronger than it had the first time, steadier. I felt the difference in my chest, in my spine. I sat up straighter. "And I'll prove my innocence because I didn't do this." "Everyone says that." I'm sure they do, but I'm telling the truth. And I want to see my lawyer, now. Morrison stared at me for a long moment. I could see him recalculating, trying to figure out what had changed. The first time through this conversation, I'd been crying, barely coherent. Now I was calm, focused, certain. Finally, he gathered his papers. "You're making a mistake," he said as he stood. "A big one. The DA might not offer this deal again. I'll take my chances." He left, and the door clanged shut behind him with a sound I remembered so well it made my teeth ache. I sat alone in that interrogation room and took a deep breath. I was alive. I was young. I had a second chance. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. The first time around, I'd been 23 and stupid. Not stupid in the traditional sense. I'd graduated from UCLA with honors, had built a successful business, had a good head on my shoulders, but I'd been stupid about people. Stupid about trust. Stupid about believing that friendship and loyalty meant something. I'd met Melissa Foster freshman year of college. She'd been my roommate in the dorms, assigned randomly by the housing office. We'd bonded immediately over late-night study sessions, shared dreams of financial independence, and a mutual love of terrible reality TV. By sophomore year, we were inseparable. By senior year, we were making plans to start a business together. Chen and Foster Financial Services. We'd incorporated the day after graduation, working out of Melissa's parents' garage in Pasadena while we studied for our Series 65 licenses. Within a year, we had our own office in Santa Monica and our first 10 clients. Within 3 years, we had 42 clients and a reputation for being thorough, honest, and good at what we did. I handled client relations and investment strategies. I loved that part. Meeting with people, understanding their goals, helping them plan for retirement or their kids' college funds. I was good with people. Good at making them feel heard and understood. Melissa managed the books and operations. She was detail-oriented, organized, good with systems and procedures. She made sure our paperwork was filed correctly, our compliance was up to date, our accounts balanced to the penny. We were partners in every sense of the word, equal owners, equal decision makers, best friends. For 3 years, we built something real, something we were proud of. We weren't getting rich. Most of our clients were small business owners and middle-class families who needed help managing their retirement accounts and tax planning. But we were making a good living, and we were doing it honestly. Then my mother got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The diagnosis came out of nowhere. She'd gone to the doctor complaining of back pain and indigestion, and 3 weeks later, she was in UCLA Medical Center being told she had maybe 3 months to live. I took a leave of absence immediately, Melissa insisted. "Go be with your mom," she'd said, hugging me tight in our office. "Don't worry about anything here. I've got it covered." I spent 6 weeks sleeping in a hospital chair, holding my mother's hand through brutal rounds of chemotherapy that ultimately did nothing but make her last days more miserable. I watched her fade from a vibrant 60-year-old woman to a skeletal ghost who couldn't keep down water. I made the decision to stop treatment. I held her hand when she died. Melissa was so supportive. She came to the hospital with food, with coffee, with magazines I never read. She came to the funeral and held my hand during the service. She texted me every day, "Take all the time you need. We're fine here. I love you." My mother died on a Tuesday. I came back to the office that Friday thinking work would help distract me from the grief. 3 days later, the FBI showed up at our office with a warrant. Sitting in that interrogation room, knowing what I knew now, I could see it all so clearly. The pattern had been there all along. I'd just been too trusting, too grief-stricken, too naive to see it. Melissa had been stealing for months before my mother got sick. Small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, always from clients who had large accounts and weren't monitoring them closely. She'd been testing the waters, seeing how much she could take without getting caught. When I left for the hospital, she'd accelerated. She'd taken bigger amounts, moved faster, gotten greedier. She'd known my mother was dying. She'd known I'd be distracted, unavailable, unable to check on things. It was the perfect opportunity. And when one of the clients finally noticed and called the office asking about an unauthorized withdrawal, Melissa had panicked. She couldn't make the money reappear. She couldn't explain where it had gone. So she'd done the only thing she could think of. She'd blamed me. She'd spent the weeks while I was at the hospital building her case. She'd used the backup security key from our office safe to make transfers that looked like they came from me. She'd forged my signature on authorization forms, traced them carefully using a light table, practicing until they looked perfect. She'd created fake email trails, fake paper trails, fake evidence, and she'd given the FBI a statement painting me as secretive, suspicious, someone who'd been acting strange for months. She'd played the role of the shocked, betrayed friend perfectly. In my first life, it had worked. I'd signed the confession. I'd gone to prison. Melissa had walked away free with 4.8 million on offshore accounts and a reputation as the honest businesswoman who'd been betrayed by her criminal partner. But this time, I knew the truth, and I knew exactly how to prove it. My court-appointed lawyer arrived 3 hours later. His name was Jeff Patterson, and he looked exactly as I remembered. Middle-aged, tired, wearing an off-the-rack suit that had seen better days and carrying a briefcase that was held together with duct tape in one corner. In my first life, Jeff had been adequate. Not great, not terrible, just adequate. He'd encouraged me to take the plea deal because he'd genuinely believed the evidence against me was too strong to fight. He'd been working as a public defender for 15 years, and he'd seen enough guilty clients proclaim their innocence that he'd developed a healthy skepticism. But he wasn't a bad person. He was just overworked, underpaid, and realistic about the odds. This time, I needed him to be more than adequate. I needed him to be excellent. "Miss Chen," he said, sitting down across from me and pulling out a legal pad. "I'm Jeff Patterson, your court-appointed attorney. Detective Morrison says you refused to sign the confession. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Can I ask why? The DA's offer of 20 years is actually quite good considering—" "I didn't do it," I interrupted. "I didn't embezzle anything. I was framed." He looked at me with the expression I remembered so well. Polite skepticism mixed with professional patience. "Miss Chen, I understand you want to fight this, but the evidence against you is very strong. They have your fingerprints on physical ledgers, your signature on authorization forms, and computer records showing your login credentials. Accessing the accounts, your business partner has given a detailed statement. Melissa is lying. Why would she lie? Because she's the one who stole the money, and she's using me as her scapegoat." Jeff sighed. He'd heard this story 1,000 times before, I realized. The innocent defendant claiming they were framed by the real criminal. It was such a cliche that he probably tuned it out automatically. "Listen," I said, leaning forward, I know how this sounds. I know you've probably heard this from every client you've ever had. But I'm telling you the truth, and I can prove it. I just need you to trust me long enough to hire the right experts." "Experts are expensive, Miss Chen. You're indigent. That's why you have a court-appointed attorney." "I'm not indigent. My mother had a life insurance policy, $200,000. I'm the beneficiary. The payout should be processed within the next week or two." His pen stopped moving. "You have $200,000? "Yes, and I'm willing to spend every penny of it to prove my innocence." Jeff studied me for a long moment. I could see him reassessing, the skepticism in his eyes shifting to something closer to interest. A client with resources changed everything. "All right," he said slowly. "Tell me your theory. If Melissa Foster framed you, how did she do it?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment. In my first life, I'd tried to explain this to Detective Morrison, and he'd dismissed me immediately. I'd tried to explain it to Jeff, and he'd been sympathetic but unconvinced. The evidence had seemed too strong, too comprehensive, too airtight. But now I had knowledge they didn't have. I knew exactly what to look for. I knew which threads to pull. Our company's financial system required two-factor authentication using a physical security key, I said. You had to plug it into the USB port. There's no way to access the system remotely. Melissa and I each had one. The prosecution is saying my key was used to make the fraudulent transfers. Okay. But my key was in my purse the entire time I was at the hospital with my mother. I remember because I was paranoid about losing it. Our office keys were on the same key ring. I kept it with me constantly. The prosecution will say you could have gone back to the office. I couldn't have. I was in the ICU with my mother during the exact timestamps of the transfers. The ICU is on the 8th floor of UCLA Medical Center. Our office is in Santa Monica. It's a 40-minute drive minimum, and that's without traffic. And the transfers happened at times when my mother was actively dying, when I was literally holding her hand while doctors worked on her. Jeff was writing now, faster. You can prove you were at the hospital? Yes. Hospital security footage, ICU logs, nurses' notes, visitor sign-in sheets. I never left the floor for more than 10 minutes at a time, and even then it was just to go to the bathroom or get coffee from the cafeteria on the same floor. Then how did the transfers get made with your security key? We kept a backup key in the office safe. Melissa had the combination. He looked up. So your theory is that Foster used the backup key to make the transfers? Yes, and she had full administrative access to our computer systems, so she could have created a shadow login that looked like mine. She could have made it appear that I was the one accessing the accounts when it was really her. That's actually a decent theory, Jeff said. He sounded surprised. But you'd need experts to prove it. A digital forensics expert to examine the computer systems and prove the login was cloned. A forensic accountant to trace the money and establish a pattern that exonerates you. I know, that's what I want to hire. And you're sure about the life insurance money? Completely sure. My mother's policy was with Northwestern Mutual. I have the policy number memorized. The payout is $200,000, and I'm the sole beneficiary. Jeff tapped his pen against his legal pad. Okay, let me make some calls. If the money comes through, I know some good experts, the best in their fields, but Miss Chen, he met my eyes. This is going to be expensive. Very expensive. You might spend all that money and still get convicted if the evidence doesn't pan out the way you think it will. I understand, but I'm not going to prison for something I didn't do. I'd rather spend every penny trying to prove my innocence than accept a plea deal for a crime I didn't commit. He nodded slowly. All right then, let's get to work. The county jail was exactly as miserable as I remembered it being. The holding cells were overcrowded. The food was barely edible. The mattresses were 2 inches of foam over concrete slabs. I had a cellmate named Tasha Rodriguez, who'd been arrested for check fraud and spent most of her time crying about her 3 kids who were now in foster care. In my first life, I'd found the jail unbearable. The noise, the smell, the violence that lurked just beneath the surface of every interaction. I'd been terrified constantly, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. This time was different. This time I knew it was temporary. I knew I'd get out. I knew exactly how many days I'd be here before the truth came out, approximately 60 days, give or take a few for legal maneuvering. I could endure 60 days. I'd endured 15 years. The other inmates sensed the difference in me, I think. I wasn't prey. I wasn't scared. I kept my head down, minded my own business, but I carried myself with a confidence that made people leave me alone. In prison, confidence can be the difference between being targeted and being ignored. Tasha and I developed an uneasy truce. She cried at night. I ignored it and stared at the ceiling, using the time to run through my mental checklist of everything that needed to happen. During the day, we avoided each other as much as possible in the 8x10 cell was shared. You're different, she said one night about a week into my stay. Most people coming in here for the first time, they're scared shitless. You act like you've been here before. I almost laughed. If she only knew. I'm innocent, I said instead. I'm going to prove it. Everyone says that. I know, but I mean it. She rolled over to face the wall. Good luck with that. The life insurance payout came through 2 weeks after my arrest. Jeff showed up at the jail with paperwork for me to sign, transferring the funds into a client trust account he controlled. I've made the calls, he said. I've got commitments from 2 experts, Dr. Sarah Kim for digital forensics and Robert Chen for forensic accounting. Both are excellent. Both are expensive. How expensive? Dr. Kim charges $400 an hour. Robert charges $350. We're probably looking at 300 hours of work between them, plus lab fees, court appearance fees, and report preparation. All told, you're looking at $120,000 to $150,000. I felt a flutter in my chest. That was more than I'd expected, though I shouldn't have been surprised. Expert witnesses didn't come cheap. Do it, I said. Miss Chen, that's going to leave you with very little money after. I don't care. I need the best. Hire them. He nodded and made notes on his legal pad. There's one more thing. I want to file an emergency motion for an independent investigation. The prosecution has had 3 weeks to build their case. We need access to all their evidence, and we need our experts to have time to examine everything before trial. What are our chances of getting the motion granted? Good, actually. You haven't been convicted yet. You're entitled to mount a defense. Judge Harold Chen is handling your preliminary hearing, and he's known for being fair-minded. If we can show that there's a genuine factual dispute and that expert analysis might resolve it, he'll likely grant the motion. Judge Chen, I repeated. Any relation? To you, no, Chen is a common name, but I've appeared before him before. He's tough but fair. He won't rubber stamp the prosecution's case just because they have a lot of evidence. He'll want to see that justice is done. That was something, at least. In my first life, I'd never made it to Judge Chen's courtroom. I'd signed the confession and been sentenced by a different judge who'd given me 20 years and told me I should be grateful it wasn't more. When's the motion hearing? Next week. I'll file the paperwork tomorrow. The motion hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in Department 12 of the Los Angeles Superior Court. They transported me from the jail in a sheriff's van, shackled at the wrists and ankles. I shuffled into the courtroom in my orange jumpsuit, feeling the weight of the chains and the eyes of everyone in the gallery. Judge Harold Chen was a stern-looking man in his early 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up from the paperwork on his bench as I was led to the defense table. Jeff was already there, along with 2 other people I hadn't met yet, Dr. Sarah Kim and Robert Chen, my expert witnesses. Dr. Sarah Kim looked like she'd walked out of a cyberpunk novel. She had purple hair shaved on the sides, multiple piercings in both ears, and was wearing a black leather jacket over a graphic t-shirt that said, "One month, one, royal one months, one, 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 1 in binary code." She looked young, maybe 30, but Jeff had told me she had a PhD in computer science from MIT and had testified in over 50 criminal cases as an expert in digital forensics. Robert Chen looked exactly like what you'd expect a forensic accountant to look like. Gray hair, conservative suit, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and a briefcase that probably weighed 40 pounds full of documents and calculators. They both nodded at me as I sat down. Neither of them looked particularly sympathetic or believing. They had the neutral expressions of professionals who'd been hired to do a job and would do it well, regardless of whether they thought I was guilty or innocent. The prosecutor was a woman named Angela Reeves. She was in her late 30s, sharp-featured, wearing an expensive suit and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd won most of her cases. I remembered her from my first life, though I'd never spoken to her directly. She'd been the one to accept my guilty plea and recommend the 20-year sentence. "Your Honor," Jeff began once we were all assembled, "the defense moves for an order allowing independent expert analysis of the evidence in this case. As you can see from our filing, we have retained Dr. Sarah Kim, a digital forensics expert, and Robert Chen, a forensic accountant. We're requesting access to all evidence collected by the prosecution, including computer systems, financial records, and physical documents, so that our experts can conduct their own analysis." Judge Chen looked at Angela. "Ms. Reeves, response?" Angela stood smoothly. "Your Honor, the state opposes this motion. The defendant's guilt is clear from the evidence we've already collected. Her fingerprints are on physical ledgers documenting the fraudulent transactions. Her signature appears on authorization forms. Computer logs show her login credentials accessing the client accounts at the exact times the transfers were made. Her business partner, Miss Melissa Foster, has provided a detailed sworn statement describing the defendant's suspicious behavior and explaining that she was the only other person with access to these accounts. The defense has had adequate time to review our evidence through normal discovery procedures, Angela continued. This motion appears to be nothing more than a delaying tactic designed to postpone trial and give the defendant time to manufacture alternative theories. Jeff stood up. Your Honor, with respect, the prosecution's characterization is incorrect. My client maintains her innocence, and she has a credible theory of the crime that requires expert analysis to prove. The prosecution says Ms. Chen's login credentials were used, but computer systems can be manipulated. Logins can be cloned. Our digital forensics expert needs to examine the original systems to determine whether that happened here. Similarly, Jeff continued, the prosecution points to fingerprints and signatures, but my client has an alibi for the time period in question. She was at UCLA Medical Center caring for her dying mother. We have hospital records, ICU logs, and visitor sign-ins that place her physically at the hospital during the exact timestamps of these transactions. If she was at the hospital, someone else must have made those transfers. Judge Chen leaned back in his chair. Ms. Reeves, does the prosecution dispute that Ms. Chen was at the hospital during the relevant time period? Angela hesitated just slightly. We acknowledge that Ms. Chen was visiting her mother at UCLA Medical Center. However, our evidence suggests she made the transfers remotely or during brief periods when she left the hospital. But the system requires a physical security key, Jeff interjected. There's no remote access capability. And the hospital records show Ms. Chen was continuously present in the ICU. She didn't leave for periods long enough to drive to Santa Monica and back. She could have had an accomplice, Angela said. Then charge the accomplice, Jeff replied. But you haven't, because there is no accomplice. The only people with access to the company's systems were Miss Chen and Miss Foster. If Miss Chen didn't make the transfers, that leaves Miss Foster. Judge Chen held up a hand. Let me ask this. Ms. Reeves, has the prosecution investigated Miss Foster as a potential suspect? Miss Foster reported the discrepancies, Your Honor. She's been fully cooperative. She voluntarily provided financial records, computer access logs, and a sworn statement. We have no evidence implicating her. Have you looked for evidence implicating her? Angela's jaw tightened slightly. We've investigated the case thoroughly, Your Honor. The evidence points to Miss Chen. Because you haven't looked anywhere else, Jeff said. Your Honor, this is precisely why we need independent experts. The prosecution has tunnel vision. They've built their case around one theory, that my client is guilty, without seriously investigating alternative suspects or explanations. Judge Chen was quiet for a moment, reading through the motion paperwork. Finally, he looked up. I'm going to grant the motion, he said. The defense has raised legitimate questions about the prosecution's timeline and evidence. Ms. Chen is entitled to mount a vigorous defense, and expert testimony is often crucial in white-collar crime cases. Angela stood up quickly. Your Honor, Ms. Reeves, the defendant hasn't been convicted yet. She's presumed innocent. If your evidence is as strong as you say, it will withstand scrutiny from defense experts. If it doesn't withstand scrutiny, then perhaps your case isn't as airtight as you believe. He made a note on his order sheet. The defense experts will have full access to all evidence, including computer systems, financial records, and physical documents. The prosecution will cooperate with reasonable requests for additional information. We'll reconvene for a preliminary hearing in 60 days. That should give everyone time to complete their investigations. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. I was led back to the jail van, but I didn't care about the shackles or the uncomfortable seats or the 40-minute drive back to the county jail. Judge Chen had granted our motion. Jeff had bought us time. Now it was up to Dr. Kim and Robert to find the evidence I knew was there. Back in my cell, Tasha was lying on her bunk staring at the ceiling. How'd it go? She asked without looking at me. Good. The judge granted our motion for independent experts. What's that mean? It means I get to prove I'm innocent. She rolled over to look at me. You really think you can do that? Beat this? I know I can. She studied me for a long moment. You're weird, you know that? You're not like the other girls in here. You don't act scared, you don't cry. You act like you already know how this is going to end. I climbed onto my own bunk and stared at the ceiling. Maybe I do. Dr. Sarah Kim came to see me at the jail 3 days later. A guard brought me to the attorney meeting room where she was waiting with 2 laptops and several external hard drives spread across the table. "Miss Chen," she said, looking up when I entered. "I'm Sarah Kim. Your lawyer hired me to examine the digital forensics in your case." "I remember. Thank you for taking the case." She gestured for me to sit. "I'm going to be honest with you. When Jeff first told me about your case, I was skeptical. The prosecution has computer logs showing your login credentials accessing the system. That's usually pretty damning evidence. But he said you had a theory about cloned credentials, so I decided to take a look." "And?" She smiled, and it transformed her face. "And you were right. Someone definitely cloned your login." I felt a rush of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I'd known it was true, of course. I'd lived through it once already. But having someone else confirm it, having proof, made it real in a way that memory alone couldn't. "How can you tell?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Dr. Kim turned one of the laptops toward me. The screen showed lines of code and log files that meant nothing to me. "Your company used a system called Secure Finance Pro for managing client accounts," she said. "It's actually pretty good security. Two-factor authentication with physical security keys, encrypted connections, detailed audit logs. In theory, it should be very difficult to fake credentials." In theory? In theory, but no system is perfect. Every system has vulnerabilities, especially if someone with administrative access wants to exploit them. She clicked through several screens. "Here's what I found. 3 weeks before the first fraudulent transfer, someone with administrator privileges accessed the user management system and created what's called a shadow account. It's basically a duplicate of your account. Same username, same permissions, same access rights, but with a different session ID." What does that mean? It means someone created a second version of your login that they could use to access the system while making it look like you were the one logging in. To anyone looking at the audit logs, it would appear that your account accessed the system, but it was actually this shadow account. Can you prove who created the shadow account? I can narrow it down. The shadow account was created from an IP address inside your office network, and the creation logs show it was done using an administrator account. According to your company's records, only 2 people had administrator access, you and Melissa Foster. And I was at the hospital when it was created. Exactly. I cross-referenced the timestamp with UCLA Medical Center's records. At the exact time the shadow account was created, March 12th at 10:47 p.m., you were in the ICU with your mother. Security footage shows you entering at 6:30 p.m. and not leaving until 8:15 the next morning. I leaned forward. That's proof. That's actual proof that I didn't do it. It's strong evidence, Dr. Kim agreed, but I wanted to find more, so I kept digging. She opened another file. "The prosecution claims your security key was used to make the transfers. That's true, the system logs show a valid security key being used, but here's the thing, they had a backup key. It was kept in your office safe." Melissa had the combination. "Right. And I found something interesting in the physical access logs for your office building. Your building has keycard entry, and it keeps records of who enters and when. On 7 different occasions when fraudulent transfers were made, Melissa Foster's keycard was used to enter the building during hours when the office was supposedly closed. Late nights, early mornings, weekends. She was coming in to make the transfers when no one else would be there. That's my theory, and it gets better. I examined the metadata on the authorization forms, the ones with your supposedly forged signature. They were all scanned into the computer system using a scanner in your office. But the metadata shows they were scanned on dates and times when, according to hospital records, you were at UCLA Medical Center. So Melissa scanned them. Almost certainly. And there's one more thing." Dr. Kim's smile widened. "I found traces of the shadow account accessing your email. Whoever created it didn't just want to make fraudulent transfers. They wanted to read your emails, probably to make sure you weren't getting suspicious or to see what your clients were saying. Can you trace those email accesses to Melissa?" "Not directly, But I can prove that the shadow account accessed your email from IP addresses inside your office network at times when hospital records show you were physically at the hospital. And your building access logs show that on several of those occasions, Melissa Foster was the only person who entered the building. I sat back in my chair. It was everything I needed. Everything I'd hoped for. "This is enough to prove I didn't do it," I said quietly. "It should be," Dr. Kim agreed. "But you know how court cases work. The prosecution will try to poke holes in my analysis. They'll bring in their own experts to argue that I'm wrong, that the logs could have been manipulated, that there are other explanations. It's going to be a fight. I'm ready for a fight." She studied me for a moment. "You know, I've worked on a lot of cases. Most innocent people are terrified, desperate, falling apart. You're none of those things. You're calm, focused. It's almost like you knew exactly what I'd find." I met her eyes. "I know what the truth is. I just needed someone to help me prove it." Robert Chen came the following week. He was more reserved than Dr. Kim, more formal. He sat across from me with a leather portfolio and spent the first 5 minutes organizing his papers before speaking. "Miss Chen," he said finally, "I've been reviewing the financial records in your case. Mr. Patterson asked me to look for patterns that might exonerate you or implicate someone else. And did you find any?" "I did, several, in fact." He opened his portfolio and pulled out a series of spreadsheets. "Let's start with the timeline. According to the prosecution, you embezzled $4.2 million over a 6-week period from March 15th through April 23rd. During that time, your mother was hospitalized and you were on a leave of absence from your business." "Yes." "But the pattern of theft actually started much earlier than that. I found evidence of unauthorized withdrawals going back nearly 8 months, starting in August of the previous year." I felt my heart rate increase. This was even earlier than I'd thought. "What kind of withdrawals?" I asked. "Small ones, $3,000 here, $5,000 there. Always from clients with large account balances who weren't closely monitoring their statements. The amounts were carefully chosen to stay under the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts in your company's accounting software. I didn't make those withdrawals." "I believe you, because here's the interesting part. During the 8-month period when these early thefts occurred, you were actively in the office every day. Your calendar shows client meetings, consultations, regular business activities. If you were stealing money, why would you do it while you were physically present? And could be caught? It doesn't make sense." "Unless someone was setting me up." "Precisely. Someone who wanted to establish a pattern of theft that could later be blamed on you. Someone who was careful at first, taking small amounts, but who planned to accelerate once you were out of the picture." Robert flipped to another spreadsheet. "Then we come to the period when your mother was hospitalized. Suddenly, the thefts become much larger and more frequent. Over 6 weeks, $4.2 million is taken, more than 10 times what was stolen in the previous 8 months combined. Because whoever was doing it knew they had a limited window." "Exactly. They knew you'd eventually come back to work. They needed to take as much as possible while you were gone and unable to notice." "Can you connect any of this to Melissa Foster?" Robert's expression became more serious. "That's where things get interesting. I obtained access to Miss Foster's personal financial records as part of the discovery process. The prosecution fought it, but Judge Chen ruled that if we're alleging she's the real perpetrator, we're entitled to examine her finances." "What did you find?" "Miss Foster has been living beyond her means for years. Credit card debt, personal loans, a mortgage she could barely afford. But starting about 8 months ago, right when the thefts began, she suddenly started making large payments on her debts. Cash payments, usually just under $10,000. Structured to avoid reporting requirements." "Exactly. Banks have to report cash deposits over $10,000 to the IRS. By keeping the payments just under that threshold, she avoided triggering reports. But the pattern is clear. Over 8 months, she deposited approximately $180,000 in cash into various accounts. That's the money she stole during the early period." "That's my theory. But there's more. I traced the $4.2 million that was stolen during your mother's illness. It was transferred to several different accounts before ultimately ending up in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. My breath caught. This was the evidence I needed most. Can you prove the Cayman account belongs to Melissa? I can. The account was opened using Miss Foster's passport number. The bank in Georgetown provided me with the account opening documents as part of their cooperation with the investigation. Her signature is on file. She actually used her own name? Not quite. The account is technically owned by a shell corporation registered in the British Virgin Islands, but Miss Foster is listed as the corporation's sole director and authorized signatory. She probably thought the offshore structure would protect her, make it difficult to trace. But it didn't. No, because the bank is concerned about liability. If the account contains proceeds of fraud, which it clearly does, they could face legal action. They're very motivated to cooperate with investigations. Robert pulled out another document. Here's something else. The Cayman account currently contains $4.8 million. That's $600,000 more than the $4.2 million you're accused of stealing. Where did the extra money come from? I'm still investigating, but I found some troubling patterns. Miss Foster's parents both have retirement accounts that show unexplained withdrawals totaling about $400,000. Her sister reported identity theft 2 years ago. Someone opened credit cards in her name and maxed them out. The amounts add up to about $150,000. Jesus, she stole from her own family? It appears so, and there may be more. I'm still looking into other potential victims. But the pattern is clear. Melissa Foster has been embezzling and stealing for years from multiple sources and funneling the money into offshore accounts. I sat back processing this. In my first life, I'd known Melissa had framed me, but I hadn't known the full scope of her crimes. I'd thought it was just our company, just the $4.2 million, but she was a serial thief, a career criminal, someone who'd spent years stealing from everyone around her, employers, business partners, family members, and she'd been prepared to let me spend the rest of my life in prison to cover it up. Is this enough? I asked. Is this enough to prove I didn't do it? Robert nodded slowly. I believe it is. The financial evidence shows a clear pattern of theft that predates your mother's illness and continues with or without your involvement. The offshore accounts tied directly to Miss Foster, and the timeline makes it physically impossible for you to have made many of these transfers. What about the signatures? The prosecution says the authorization forms have my signature. I arranged for those to be examined by a forensic document examiner. Her name is Dr. Patricia Huang, and she's one of the best in the country. She analyzed the signatures using microscopic photography and determined that they're forgeries. Traced signatures, not original ones. You can see the hesitation marks, the slightly uneven pressure, the telltale signs of someone carefully copying rather than signing naturally. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying since I woke up in this second life. It was all coming together. Every piece of evidence I needed was falling into place. Thank you, I said quietly. Thank you for believing me, for looking at the evidence with an open mind. Robert closed his portfolio. Miss Chen, I don't believe or disbelieve my clients. I follow the evidence wherever it leads. In this case, the evidence clearly exonerates you and implicates Miss Foster. The question now is whether the prosecution will acknowledge that or whether they'll dig in and force us to go to trial. What do you think they'll do? He considered for a moment. Ms. Reeves is a good prosecutor, but she's also ambitious. She doesn't like to lose. My guess is she'll fight this as long as she can. But eventually, when the evidence becomes overwhelming, she'll have no choice but to drop the charges. And charge Melissa instead. Yes, assuming she has any integrity at all. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 60 days after my arrest, exactly as Judge Chen had ordered. During those 60 days, Jeff, Dr. Kim, and Robert worked tirelessly to build my defense. Dr. Kim prepared a 47-page report detailing her findings about the cloned login credentials, the shadow account, and the building access logs. She included screenshots, code samples, and timeline analyses that made it impossible to deny what had happened. Robert prepared his own report, 62 pages documenting the financial patterns, the offshore accounts, Melissa's personal finances, and the expert analysis of the forged signatures. He traced every dollar, documented every transaction, built an airtight case. Jeff coordinated everything, filing motions, arguing with Angela Reeves, pushing back against the prosecution's attempts to block or limit our evidence. And I sat in my jail cell waiting, reading the reports Jeff brought me, making notes, preparing for the moment when I'd finally face Melissa in court. Tasha watched me with increasing curiosity. "You're different from when you came in," she said one night about a week before the hearing. "You seemed confident before, but now you seem, I don't know, like you've already won." "Maybe I have," I said. "How can you be so sure?" I looked at her. Tasha was 32, a mother of 3, arrested for writing bad checks to buy groceries when her unemployment ran out. She was small-time, desperate, not a real criminal. Just someone who'd made bad choices when backed into a corner. In my first life, I'd barely spoken to her. I'd been too consumed by my own terror and grief, but this time, knowing I'd get out, I felt something like sympathy for her. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Why'd you do it? The check fraud?" She shrugged. "My kids were hungry. My ex stopped paying child support. I lost my job. What was I supposed to do?" "You could have gone to a food bank, applied for assistance." I did. The food bank had a 3-week waiting list. Assistance takes months to process. My kids needed to eat now. I nodded slowly. "How long are you looking at?" "My public defender says probably 2 years if I take a plea. 5 if I go to trial and lose." Jesus. "Yeah." She laughed bitterly. 2 years for trying to feed my kids. Meanwhile, rich people steal millions and get away with it. Not always, I thought. Sometimes they go to prison for 25 years. But I didn't say that out loud. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived on a cloudy Thursday morning. I was transported to the courthouse in the sheriff's van, shackled as usual, but this time felt different. This time I knew what was coming. The courtroom gallery was fuller than I expected. I saw some of our former clients sitting in the back rows, people whose money had been stolen who wanted to see justice done. I saw reporters with notebooks and cameras, and I saw Melissa. She was sitting in the front row behind the prosecution table wearing a conservative black suit and minimal makeup. She looked somber, serious, like someone who'd been betrayed by her best friend and was bravely facing the difficult task of testifying against her. Our eyes met across the courtroom. In my first life, this moment had destroyed me. The look of sad disappointment on her face, the way she'd shaken her head slightly as if to say, "I can't believe you did this." It had gutted me even as I'd known I was innocent. This time, I just smiled. A small, cold smile that made her eyes widen slightly in confusion. Then I turned away and sat down next to Jeff at the defense table. Dr. Kim and Robert were sitting behind us in the first row of gallery seating, ready to be called as witnesses if needed. They both nodded at me. Judge Chen entered, and we all stood. "Be seated," he said. We're here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of People versus Emily Chen. Ms. Reeves, you may call your first witness." Angela stood as key. "Your Honor, the people call Detective Michael Morrison." Morrison took the stand and was sworn in. Angela led him through the basics of the case, how he'd been called to investigate after Melissa Foster reported the embezzlement, what evidence he'd collected, why he'd arrested me. "Detective Morrison," Angela said, "based on your investigation, do you believe you had probable cause to arrest Emily Chen for embezzlement?" "Yes." The evidence was overwhelming. We had her fingerprints on physical ledgers, her signatures on authorization forms, computer logs showing her credentials accessing the accounts. Her business partner gave a detailed statement implicating her. "Thank you. No further questions." Jeff stood for cross-examination. "Detective Morrison, you testified that you had overwhelming evidence, but did you investigate alternative suspects?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "The evidence pointed to Miss Chen." "That's not what I asked. Did you investigate Melissa Foster as a potential suspect?" "Miss Foster was the one who reported the crime. She cooperated fully with our investigation." Again, not what I asked. Did you investigate her? Did you look into her finances, her travel records, her access to the company's computer systems? Morrison hesitated. No. Why not? Because she was the victim. She reported the crime. Or she reported it because she needed to cover up her own crimes. Did you consider that possibility? Objection, Angela said. Speculation. Your Honor, Jeff replied, I'm trying to establish whether the detective conducted a thorough investigation or simply jumped to conclusions based on surface-level evidence. Overruled, Judge Chen said. Answer the question, Detective. Morrison looked uncomfortable. We followed the evidence we had. But you didn't look for evidence that might point to someone else. You found evidence implicating Miss Chen, evidence that could have been planted or manipulated, and you stopped looking. Isn't that true? We investigated thoroughly. Did you check Miss Chen's alibi? Did you verify whether she was at UCLA Medical Center during the times when the fraudulent transfers were made? Another hesitation. We knew she'd been visiting her mother at the hospital. But did you check the ICU logs? Did you review security footage? Did you verify whether it would have been physically possible for her to leave the hospital, drive to Santa Monica, make the transfers, and return without being noticed? No, we believed she could have accessed the system remotely. But the system requires a physical security key. There's no remote access. Did you verify that? Morrison's face was getting red. Ms. Foster explained the system to us. She said, Ms. Foster told you what she wanted you to believe, and you believed her without verifying, without investigating, without considering that she might be lying. Objection, Angela said, standing up, and counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Patterson, move on. Jeff nodded. Detective, you testified that Miss Chen's fingerprints were on physical ledgers. Where were these ledgers kept? In the office. In a locked safe? No, they were in file cabinets in the office. File cabinets that both Miss Chen and Miss Foster had access to? Yes. So, Miss Foster could have handled those ledgers and placed Miss Chen's fingerprints on them through normal business operations? I suppose so, but... And you testified that authorization forms had Miss Chen's signature. Did you have those signatures examined by a forensic document examiner? We had a handwriting expert review them. He said they were genuine. But did he examine them for signs of forgery? Tracing? Hesitation marks? I don't know the details of his analysis. Jeff walked back to the defense table and picked up a document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Defense Exhibit A, a forensic document analysis conducted by Dr. Patricia Huang, one of the leading experts in questioned documents in the United States. He handed copies to Angela and the judge, then turned back to Morrison. Dr. Huang examined the same authorization forms using microscopic photography and specialized lighting. She found clear evidence that the signatures were traced, not original, hesitation marks, uneven pressure, all the hallmarks of forgery. Did the prosecution's handwriting expert look for these signs? Morrison shifted in his seat. I'd have to ask him. But you didn't think to ask at the time. You accepted his conclusion that the signatures were genuine without questioning his methodology. We trusted his expertise. But you didn't trust the possibility that Miss Foster might be lying. Why is that, Detective? Morrison had no answer. Jeff looked at Judge Chen. No further questions. Angela called Melissa next. I watched her walk to the stand. She moved carefully, like someone conscious of being observed, her expression schooled into appropriate solemnity. She was sworn in, gave her name and address, explained her relationship to me. Miss Foster, Angela began, how long have you known the defendant? Since college. We met freshman year at UCLA and became close friends. We started our business together after graduation. And how would you describe your relationship? We were best friends. I trusted her completely. We were like sisters. The words sent a cold spike through my chest. In my first life, those words had broken something inside me. the casual certainty of her betrayal, packaged in the language of friendship. This time, I just watched, waiting. When did you first suspect something was wrong? Angela asked. About a month after Emily came back from her leave of absence. One of our clients called about an unauthorized withdrawal. When I looked into it, I found so many more. What did you do? I didn't want to believe it. Emily had just lost her mother. She was grieving. I thought maybe there was a mistake or maybe she'd made an error in her emotional state, but the evidence kept mounting. Finally, I realized I had no choice but to report it. How did the defendant react when you confronted her? She denied it. She said she didn't know what I was talking about, that there must be some mistake. But I'd seen the evidence. Her login credentials, her signatures, her fingerprints. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't ignore the facts. This must have been very difficult for you. Melissa's eyes got misty. It was devastating. Emily was my best friend. Betraying her like this, reporting her, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I had a responsibility to our clients. To the truth. Angela nodded sympathetically. Miss Foster, can you tell the court about your company's security measures, how the financial system worked? We used Secure Finance Pro. It required two-factor authentication with physical security keys. Emily and I each had our own key. There was also a backup key in the office safe. Who had access to the safe? Both of us. We both knew the combination. So, theoretically, either of you could have used the backup key? Yes, but I never did. I had my own key. Did you ever observe the defendant using the backup key? No, but she could have. She had access whenever she wanted. Angela walked back to her table. Miss Foster, during the time when these thefts occurred, where were you? I was managing the office while Emily was on leave. I was handling all the client meetings, processing paperwork, keeping things running. Were you in the office every day? Yes, except for a few days when I had client meetings off-site. Did you notice anything unusual during this time? Not at first. Emily was communicating with me regularly, texts and calls about clients. But looking back, I realized she was probably checking to make sure I hadn't discovered what she was doing yet. Your Honor, Jeff interjected. Objection. Speculation. Sustained. Miss Foster, please stick to what you observed directly. Melissa nodded. I'm sorry. It's just hard not to try to understand why my best friend would do this to me. Angela patted her shoulder sympathetically, then returned to her questioning. Miss Foster, do you have any financial accounts in the Cayman Islands? No. Have you ever been to the Cayman Islands? I went on vacation there once, years ago, maybe twice. I don't remember exactly. Have you ever opened a bank account there? No, definitely not. Thank you, Miss Foster. No further questions. Jeff stood up slowly. I could see the hint of a smile on his face. This was it. This was the moment. Miss Foster, he began. You testified that you and Miss Chen were best friends. Yes. Like sisters, you said. Yes. And yet you reported her to the FBI without giving her a chance to explain. Without talking to her first. Melissa's face tightened slightly. I told you, I tried to find another explanation. But the evidence was overwhelming. Overwhelming, Jeff repeated. Let's talk about that evidence. You testified that Miss Chen's login credentials were used to make the fraudulent transfers. Yes. You also testified that you had full administrative access to the computer system. Isn't that correct? Yes, I was the operations manager. So you had the ability to create new user accounts, modify existing accounts, and manipulate login credentials. Technically, yes, but yes or no, please. Yes. Jeff walked to the defense table and picked up a document. Ms. Foster, I have here a report from Dr. Sarah Kim, a digital forensics expert. She examined your company's computer systems and found evidence of a shadow account, a duplicate login that appeared to be Miss Chen but was actually controlled by someone else. Were you aware of this shadow account? Melissa's face went pale. I. No, that's not possible. Dr. Kim's analysis shows the shadow account was created 3 weeks before the fraudulent transfers began. It was created from an IP address inside your office, using an administrator account. You were the only other person with administrator access. That doesn't mean I created it. Then who did? If Miss Chen didn't create it, and hospital records prove she was at UCLA Medical Center when it was created, and you didn't create it, then who did? I don't know. Maybe someone hacked our systems. Your office network was secured with enterprise-grade firewalls and intrusion detection. Dr. Kim found no evidence of any external breach. The shadow account was created by someone with legitimate access. Melissa was starting to look panicked. I don't know anything about a shadow account. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Jeff pulled out another document. Let's talk about something else then. Your travel records show you visited the Cayman Islands 6 times in the past 2 years. Does that refresh your memory? Those were personal trips. 6 personal trips to the Cayman Islands? That's quite a lot for someone who could barely afford their mortgage payments. Objection, Angela said. Relevance? Your Honor, Jeff replied, I'm establishing that Miss Foster has been less than truthful about her connections to the Cayman Islands. This is directly relevant to her credibility as a witness. Overruled. Answer the question, Miss Foster. Melissa's hands were trembling now. The trips were... I had friends there. I visited them. Friends? I see. And during these trips to visit friends, did you happen to open a bank account at First Caribbean International Bank? No. Jeff handed a document to the judge, then to Angela, then approached the witness stand. Ms. Foster, I have here account opening documents from First Caribbean International Bank. They show an account opened 18 months ago. The account holder's name is listed as CFS Holdings Limited, a shell corporation registered in the British Virgin Islands. The authorized signatory is you. Your passport number is on file. Your signature is on the documents. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Chen banged his gavel. Melissa was shaking her head frantically. That's not possible. Someone must have stolen my identity, used my passport without my knowledge. Someone stole your passport, flew to the Cayman Islands 6 times using it, opened a bank account in your name, and deposited $4.8 million in stolen funds, all without your knowledge? Yes, that's what must have happened. $4.8 million, Jeff repeated. That's $600,000 more than the $4.2 million Miss Chen is accused of stealing. Where did the extra $600,000 come from? I don't know. Could it have come from your parents' retirement accounts? Accounts that show unauthorized withdrawals totaling approximately $400,000? Melissa's face went white. My parents... Or from credit cards, opened fraudulently in your sister's name? Cards that were maxed out to the tune of $150,000? No, I didn't. Miss Foster, you're under oath. Did you or did you not steal money from your parents and your sister? I didn't. Then how do you explain the withdrawals from their accounts? Withdrawals that match the excess funds in the Cayman Islands account? Melissa looked desperately at Angela, but Angela was staring at the documents Jeff had provided, her face tight. I don't have to explain anything, Melissa said, her voice rising. I'm not the one on trial here. Not yet, Jeff said quietly. But you should be. He walked back to the defense table. Miss Foster, you testified that you were devastated to discover your best friend's betrayal. That reporting her was one of the hardest things you've ever done. It was. And yet you've never visited her in jail, not once in 60 days. You've never written to her, called her, tried to understand her side of the story. For someone who claims to have been like sisters, you certainly moved on quickly. I It was too painful or too risky because talking to her might have exposed your lies, might have given her a chance to defend herself before you'd fully constructed your frame up. That's not true. Miss Foster, Dr. Kim's analysis shows that on 7 different occasions when fraudulent transfers were made, your keycard was used to access the office building during hours when it was supposedly closed. Can you explain that? I Sometimes I worked late or came in early. At 2:47 in the morning, at 11:32 p.m.? These aren't normal working hours. I had a lot to do with Emily gone. Or you were making the fraudulent transfers using the backup security key and the cloned login credentials. You came in when no one else would be there, made the transfers, and left before anyone could notice. No. Miss Foster, the evidence shows you had means, motive, and opportunity. You had access to the backup security key, the administrative credentials to create the shadow account, and the desperation of someone drowning in debt who needed money urgently. Miss Chen, on the other hand, was physically at a hospital 40 minutes away, provably present in an ICU during the exact times these transfers were made. Melissa was crying now, mascara running down her face. Emily was my friend. You would never betray her? Is that what you were going to say? Yes. And yet here we are. With $4.8 million in an offshore account bearing your name, travel records showing you visited the Cayman Islands multiple times, computer forensics proving someone with your level of access created a fake login, and building access logs showing you in the office during the exact times the thefts occurred. Jeff paused, letting the weight of the evidence hang in the air. Ms. Foster, I put it to you that you are the real criminal here. You embezzled millions of dollars from your clients, your business partner, and your own family. You spent months carefully constructing a frame-up, planting evidence, forging signatures. And when Emily Chen went to care for her dying mother, you saw your opportunity. You accelerated your theft, took as much as you could, and blamed it all on your best friend. No, Melissa shouted. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? Explain to this court how $4.8 million ended up in a Cayman Islands account bearing your name if you didn't put it there. Someone must have... Some mysterious person who stole your identity, used your passport, opened accounts in your name, and perfectly timed their thefts to coincide with periods when you were alone in the office. Is that your testimony? Melissa looked at Angela again, desperate. I want a lawyer. The courtroom went silent. Judge Chen leaned forward. Miss Foster, you understand that you're currently a witness, not a defendant. You don't need a lawyer to testify. I want a lawyer, Melissa repeated. I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The whispers in the gallery became a roar. Judge Chen banged his gavel repeatedly. We'll take a 15-minute recess, he said. Ms. Reeves, Mr. Patterson, approach the bench. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jeff was grinning. She invoked the Fifth, he said. That's as good as an admission of guilt. What happens now, I asked. Now Angela has to decide whether to proceed with prosecuting you, knowing her star witness just took the Fifth rather than answer questions about her own crimes. If she has any sense, she'll drop the charges. Dr. Kim and Robert joined us. That was beautiful, Dr. Kim said. The way you walked her through the evidence. She had nowhere to go. The evidence made it easy, Jeff replied. You two did excellent work. We waited in that hallway for 45 minutes. Through the courtroom doors, I could hear raised voices, Angela and Judge Chen and who knew who else, arguing about what to do. Finally, the bailiff called us back in. Judge Chen looked grim. Angela looked worse, like she'd aged 10 years in the last hour. The court is back in session, Judge Chen said. Ms. Reeves, you have something to say? Angela stood slowly. Her voice was tight, controlled, professional, but I could hear the strain underneath. Your Honor, in light of new evidence that has emerged during today's hearing, the prosecution is moving to dismiss all charges against Emily Chen. The words washed over me like warm rain. I felt Jeff's hand on my shoulder, squeezing. Furthermore, Angela continued, the state is filing an emergency motion for a warrant to arrest Melissa Foster on charges of embezzlement, fraud, forgery, perjury, and obstruction of justice. She sat down without looking at me. Judge Chen turned to me. Miss Chen, the charges against you are hereby dismissed. You're free to go. Bailiff, please remove her restraints. The bailiff came forward and unlocked the shackles around my wrists and ankles. They fell away, and I felt lighter than I had in years, in lifetimes. Miss Chen, Judge Chen said, his voice softer now, I want to apologize on behalf of the justice system. You should never have been arrested in the first place. The investigation was sloppy, the evidence was misinterpreted, and you spent 60 days in jail for a crime you didn't commit. That's unacceptable. Thank you, Your Honor. I'm ordering an immediate internal review of how this case was handled. Detective Morrison and his team will be thoroughly investigated. He banged his gavel. As for Miss Foster, bailiff, place her under arrest. I turned to watch as two bailiffs approached Melissa. She was crying, shaking her head, saying, no, 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 over and over. But they handcuffed her anyway, read her rights, let her out of the courtroom. Our eyes met one last time as she passed my table. In my first life, she'd watched me be led away in handcuffs with that expression of sad disappointment on her face. This time, I watched her be led away, and I smiled. Outside the courthouse, the California sun was blinding after 60 days in jail. I stood on the steps and took a deep breath of free air. Jeff stood beside me. You did it, he said. You're free. We did it, I corrected. You, Dr. Kim, Robert. You all believed me when no one else would. The evidence believed you, Jeff said. We just followed where it led. Reporters were gathering at the bottom of the steps, cameras and microphones raised. I could hear them shouting questions. Miss Chen, how do you feel? Were you surprised by Miss Foster's arrest? What are you going to do now? Do you want to make a statement? Jeff asked. I thought about it. In my first life, I'd never had this moment. I'd never stood on these steps as a free woman, vindicated, with the world watching. Yes, I said, I do. We walked down to where the reporters waited. Jeff held up a hand for silence. My client will make a brief statement, he said. She won't be taking questions at this time. I looked at the cameras. Somewhere on the other end of those lenses, people were watching. People who'd assumed I was guilty. People who'd judged me without knowing the truth. My name is Emily Chen, I began. 2 months ago, I was arrested for a crime I didn't commit. I was accused of embezzling $4.2 million from my company's clients, money that was actually stolen by my business partner and former best friend, Melissa Foster. I paused, making sure every word landed. I spent 60 days in jail, 60 days away from my life, my freedom, my future. 60 days because the police didn't do their job properly, because they saw evidence that seemed to point to me and stopped looking for the truth. But the truth doesn't stop being true just because it's inconvenient. Today, that truth came out. Today, justice was served, not because the system worked, but because I had the resources to hire experts who could prove my innocence. Not everyone has those resources. Not everyone gets a second chance. I looked directly into the nearest camera. If there's one thing I want people to take from this, it's this. Don't judge people before you know the facts. Don't assume guilt based on circumstantial evidence. And don't trust the system to always get it right, because sometimes it doesn't. I'm grateful to my attorney, Jeff Patterson, and to the experts who proved my innocence. I'm grateful to Judge Chen for being willing to look at the evidence with an open mind. And I'm grateful to be standing here free when I could have been starting a 20-year prison sentence for a crime I didn't commit. As for Melissa Foster, I hope she gets the justice she deserves. I hope she spends a long time in prison thinking about what she did. Not just to me, but to all the people she stole from. Our clients, her own family, everyone who trusted her. I stepped back. That's all I have to say. Thank you. The reporters erupted with questions again, but Jeff ushered me away toward his car parked at the curb. You did good, he said as we drove away from the courthouse. That was a powerful statement. I meant every word. We drove in silence for a while. I watched Los Angeles pass by outside the window, the palm trees, the traffic, the endless sprawl of the city. I'd seen all of this before in my first life, but then it had been through the windows of a prison transport van. This time I was free. What will you do now? Jeff asked. I thought about that. In my first life, I'd had no choice about what to do. I'd been in prison, dying slowly, my future stolen from me. This time, I had options. I had freedom. I had a second chance at life. I'm going to rebuild, I said. I'm going to start over. And I'm going to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Jeff glanced at me. What does that mean? It means I'm going to help people. People who've been wrongly accused. People who need experts and resources and someone who believes them. I'm going to use what I learned from this to make a difference. He smiled. That's a good plan. I learned from the best, I said, looking at him. Thank you, Jeff, for everything. Just doing my job. No, you did more than your job. You believed me when you didn't have to. You fought for me. I'll never forget that. He pulled up to my apartment, the same apartment I'd lived in with Melissa before all this happened. The place where we dreamed and planned and built our business together. I'd need to find somewhere new to live, somewhere without those memories. But that could wait. For now, I just wanted to go inside, take a shower in my own bathroom, sleep in my own bed. I wanted to be free. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The story became national news. Business partner frames friend for $4.8 million embezzlement, ran on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, every major outlet. I did interviews, told my story over and over. The nation's heart went out to me, the grieving daughter who'd lost her mother and nearly lost her freedom because of her best friend's betrayal. Melissa's trial was scheduled for 3 months later. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She tried to argue that she'd been framed, that someone had stolen her identity and opened those offshore accounts without her knowledge. But no one believed her. The evidence was too strong, too comprehensive. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. Angela Reeves refused. She was angry that she'd almost prosecuted an innocent woman, angry that her star witness had been lying to her the whole time, angry that the case had made her look foolish. She wanted to take Melissa to trial and destroy her. I didn't blame her. While Melissa sat in jail awaiting trial, in the same jail where I'd spent 60 days, I started rebuilding my life. I closed Chen & Foster Financial Services. The business was tainted, its reputation destroyed. Even if I'd wanted to continue, all our clients had left, scared off by the scandal. I didn't want to continue anyway. I was done with financial consulting. I had a new mission now. I used the remainder of my mother's life insurance money, about $50,000 after paying the experts, to start a new company. I called it Phoenix Consulting. The name was deliberate. A phoenix rises from ashes. It's reborn from destruction. That's what I'd done. That's what I wanted to help others do. Phoenix Consulting specialized in helping people who'd been wrongly accused of crimes. We worked with forensic experts, investigators, and lawyers to help people prove their innocence. We took cases pro bono when clients couldn't afford to pay. We fought against wrongful convictions. My first hire was Jennifer Wu, a paralegal from the California Innocence Project. I'd reached out to her after my release, remembering that in my first life, she'd visited me in prison just before I died. She'd been reviewing cases and thought something was wrong with mine. She'd said she'd file a motion. I died before she could. But in this life, I didn't die. And when I called her and explained what I wanted to build, she said yes immediately. I've been doing this work for years, she said over coffee at a cafe in Westwood, trying to help people who've been wrongly convicted. But it's so hard. We don't have enough resources, enough time, enough people. Most of the cases we review we can't take on because we're already overwhelmed. That's why I want to build this, I said, to create more capacity, to help more people. Why? She asked, studying me. I mean, I read about your case. You proved your innocence. You could walk away from all of this, start fresh, never think about the criminal justice system again. Why commit yourself to this work? I thought about how to answer. I couldn't tell her the real reason, that I'd lived through 15 years of wrongful imprisonment, that I'd died in a prison hospital alone and forgotten, that I'd been given an impossible second chance and I wasn't going to waste it. Because I got lucky, I said instead. I had resources. I had insurance money to hire experts. I had a good lawyer who believed me. Not everyone has that. Most people who are wrongly accused don't get the chance to prove their innocence. They take plea deals because they're scared, or they get convicted because they can't afford good representation. That's not justice, that's just broken. Jennifer nodded slowly. Okay, I'm in. When do we start? Today. My second hire was Dr. Sarah Kim. She was more expensive, but she was worth it. I offered her a position as Phoenix, Consulting's chief digital forensics expert, with a salary significantly higher than what she made freelancing. Why would I want a steady job? She asked when I made the offer. I make good money as an independent consultant. I take the cases I want, work my own hours. Because this is important work, I said. Because you'd be helping people who desperately need help. And because I'm not just offering you a job, I'm offering you the chance to build something meaningful. She considered for a long moment. Tell me more about your vision. So I did. I explained how Phoenix Consulting would work, how we'd take cases from people who'd been wrongly accused, how we'd investigate using the best forensic tools and techniques, how we'd work with lawyers to overturn wrongful convictions. We'll be like the Innocence Project, I said, but more agile, more resourced. We'll have our own experts in-house instead of relying on volunteers. We'll be able to take on more cases, move faster, make a bigger impact. Dr. Kim was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Okay, but I have one condition. What's that? I get to choose my own cases. If I don't think someone is innocent, I won't work on it. I'm not going to use my skills to help actual criminals get away with their crimes. Deal. I only want to help people who are actually innocent anyway. She held out her hand at this. Then you've got yourself a digital forensics expert. My third hire was Robert Chen. He was semi-retired, only taking occasional cases, but he agreed to come on as Phoenix Consulting's chief financial investigator. I've been doing this work for 30 years, he said when we met for lunch in Beverly Hills. I've seen every kind of financial crime you can imagine. Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. I've testified in hundreds of cases. And you're not tired of it? I'm tired of working for people who are guilty, he said frankly. Most of my clients over the years have been criminals trying to hide their money or corporations trying to avoid responsibility. I did the work because it paid well, but it never felt meaningful. What would make it meaningful? Helping people who actually deserve help. People like you, wrongly accused, facing prison for crimes they didn't commit. That's the kind of work I wish I'd been doing all along. I smiled. Then let's do it. He raised his water glass. To second chances. I clinked my glass against his. To second chances. Within 6 months, Phoenix Consulting had taken on 12 cases. Most were referred by the California Innocence Project or by lawyers who'd heard about our work. All of them involved people who'd been wrongly convicted or wrongly accused. Our first big success came 8 months after my release. A man named Marcus Williams had been convicted of murder 15 years earlier, based primarily on eyewitness testimony. He'd spent 15 years in prison maintaining his innocence. Jennifer found the case while reviewing California Innocence Project files. The eyewitness identification is shaky, she told me. The victim's sister said she saw Marcus leaving the scene, but it was dark. She only saw him for a few seconds, and she didn't know him personally. She identified him from a photo array 2 weeks later, but the photo array was suggestive. Marcus's photo was the only one that matched the general description she'd given. What about physical evidence? None. No DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon. Just the eyewitness testimony. So why was he convicted? Because the jury believed the sister. She was sympathetic, emotional, convincing. Marcus couldn't afford a good lawyer. His public defender put on a minimal defense. I reviewed the case files. Marcus had been 19 when he was convicted. He was now 34, 15 years into a life sentence. 15 years, just like me in my first life. Let's take the case, I said. Dr. Kim and Robert couldn't help with this one. There was no digital evidence, no financial records to trace. But I hired other experts, a forensic psychologist who specialized in eyewitness memory, a private investigator to track down alternative suspects. Over 6 months, we built a new case. The forensic psychologist testified that eyewitness identifications and made under stress in poor lighting from unfamiliar faces are notoriously unreliable. Our private investigator found 3 other men who matched the general description and had been in the area that night. Any of them could have been the actual killer. We filed a motion for a new trial. The DA fought it, but eventually the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Williams was granted a new trial, and the DA, faced with the weakness of their original case, declined to prosecute. Marcus walked out of prison a free man. I was there when it happened. I saw him step through the prison gates, blinking in the sunlight, tears streaming down his face. His mother was there, older and frailer than in the photos from 15 years ago. They embraced, both of them sobbing. Marcus looked at me over his mother's shoulder. "Thank you," he mouthed. I nodded. I knew exactly how he felt. Melissa's trial happened 9 months after my release. I was there for every day of it, sitting in the gallery, watching. The evidence against her was crushing. Angela Reeves, still angry about being deceived, presented a case that was airtight. Computer forensics proving Melissa had created the shadow account. Financial records showing the offshore accounts. Building access logs, travel records, testimony from her parents about the missing retirement funds, testimony from her sister about the identity theft. Melissa's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been framed, that I was the real criminal and had somehow manipulated evidence to make it look like she was guilty. But no one believed it. The jury saw through it immediately. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The cause. Jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. I sat in the front row as the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a statement. Angela Reeves spoke first. "Your Honor, Melissa Foster is a serial thief who stole from everyone around her. Her clients, her business partner, her own family. She showed no remorse, no conscience, no humanity. She was prepared to let an innocent woman spend the rest of her life in prison to cover up her crimes. The state recommends 25 years. Then it was my turn. I stood and walked to the podium. Melissa was at the defense table, looking smaller than I remembered. Prison had aged her. She looked tired, defeated, hollow. "Your Honor," I began, "my name is Emily Chen. 9 months ago, Melissa Foster tried to destroy my life." I paused, letting the words sink in. She was my best friend. I trusted her completely. We built a business together, dreamed together, supported each other through everything. When my mother was dying, Melissa was there for me. Or so I thought. But while I was holding my mother's hand in her final weeks, while I was watching the person I loved most in the world fade away, Melissa was stealing. Not just from our clients, though that was bad enough. She was stealing from me. My reputation, my freedom, my future. She forged my signature. She planted evidence. She created an elaborate frame-up designed to make sure I'd go to prison for her crimes, and she almost succeeded. I looked directly at Melissa. She couldn't meet my eyes. I spent 60 days in jail for something I didn't do. 60 days of hell. 60 days wondering if I'd spend the rest of my life in prison. And that was nothing. Nothing compared to what she tried to do to me. She was prepared to let me spend 20 years behind bars, maybe more. Your Honor, Melissa Foster isn't just a thief. She's a predator who targets the people closest to her, people who trust her, people who love her. She stole from her own parents. She ruined her sister's credit. She betrayed every single person who was ever kind to her. I took a breath. The prosecutor recommends 25 years. I think that's fair. I think it's just. I think Melissa Foster should spend a very long time in prison thinking about what she did. I sat down. The judge was silent for a moment, then he looked at Melissa. "Miss Foster, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Melissa stood shakily. "Your Honor, I'm sorry. I made terrible mistakes. I was scared and desperate, and I made the worst choices of my life. I destroyed my friendship with Emily. I hurt my family. I hurt so many people." She started crying. "I don't expect anyone to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I want Emily to know that I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry for what I did to her. I felt nothing. No sympathy, no satisfaction, just a cold emptiness where our friendship used to be. The judge cleared his throat. Miss Foster, I've reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. What you did was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. You spent months constructing an elaborate frame-up to destroy your best friend. You showed no remorse until you were caught. Even during your trial, you tried to blame Miss Chen for your crimes. You've left a trail of victims, your clients, your business partner, your own family. You've shown a pattern of theft and deception that goes back years. You're a danger to everyone around you. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, including Miss Chen. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. 2 bailiffs led Melissa away in handcuffs. She looked back at me one last time as she was taken through the door to the holding cells. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched her go. 25 years. She'd be 48 when she got out, assuming she served her full sentence. Middle-aged, with no money, no career, no one waiting for her. In my first life, that had been me. Dying in prison at 38, with nothing to show for my life but 15 years of wasted time. The symmetry was almost perfect. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting again. They'd covered the trial extensively, turned it into a national story about betrayal and justice. Miss Chen, they called, Habu. How do you feel about the verdict? I stopped at the top of the steps. I feel like justice was served. Melissa Foster committed terrible crimes and she's going to pay for them. That's how it should be. Do you feel vindicated? I feel relieved. This chapter of my life is over. Now I can focus on the future. What will you do now? I smiled. I'm going to keep helping people. People who've been wrongly accused, wrongly convicted. People who need someone to fight for them. That's what Phoenix Consulting does. Is this personal for you because of what happened? Of course it's personal. I know what it feels like to be accused of something you didn't do, to have everyone assume you're guilty, to face prison for a crime you didn't commit. I got lucky. I had resources. I had good lawyers. I was able to prove my innocence. Not everyone is that lucky. I want to help the people who aren't. More questions, but Jeff stepped forward. That's all Miss Chen has time for today. Thank you. We walked to his car. You're good at this, he said. The public speaking, the interviews. You're becoming the face of wrongful conviction advocacy. Is that a bad thing? No, it's good. People listen to you. You're sympathetic, articulate, credible. You could do a lot of good. That's the plan. The civil lawsuit took another year. I sued Melissa for damages, for the 60 days I spent in jail, for emotional distress, for loss of business and reputation, for the violation of my trust and friendship. Her lawyers tried to argue that she had no assets, that everything had been seized by the government or was tied up in restitution to other victims. But my lawyers were better. We went after everything: her family's money, her future earnings, every penny she might ever have. The jury awarded me $15 million. I'd never see most of it. Melissa had maybe $800,000 in remaining assets after all the government seizures and restitution orders. But that wasn't the point. The point was that Melissa would spend the rest of her life knowing she'd lost everything, and I'd won. I put the $800,000 into Phoenix Consulting's operating fund. We used it to hire more staff, take on more cases, help more people. Within 2 years of my release, Phoenix Consulting had a staff of 15 people and had helped 37 people prove their innocence or get their convictions overturned. We were making a real difference. I was making a real difference. 3 years after my release, I was invited to speak at UCLA's business school about ethics in finance and the criminal justice system. I stood before a lecture hall of bright-eyed students and told them my story. The hardest part, I said, wasn't the jail cell or the trial or even the betrayal. The hardest part was knowing that I'd trusted someone so completely, and that trust had almost destroyed me. A student raised her hand. How do you trust people now? I smiled. Very carefully. but I do trust people. Because the alternative is living in fear and isolation, and I refuse to do that. Melissa doesn't get to take that from me, too. Another student. Do you regret starting a business with her? No, I regret that she turned out to be a criminal, but I don't regret taking the chance. The business was good until she ruined it. And if I hadn't gone through all of this, I wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing now. Do you hate her? I thought about that. In my first life, I died hating her. Hating her had consumed me, poisoned me, made my last years unbearable. This time, I'd won. I'd gotten justice, rebuilt my life, found purpose in helping others. No, I said, I don't hate her. I pity her. She traded everything, friendship, freedom, her own soul, for money, and in the end, she lost it all. She's in prison, and I'm here. I'd say I got the better deal. The students applauded. After the lecture, several students came up to talk to me. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, asked, "How did you stay so strong? I don't think I could have handled what you went through." I looked at her. She was 21, 22 maybe, the same age I'd been when all of this started. "You'd be surprised what you can handle when you have to," I said. "Strength isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you build one day at a time by refusing to give up." "But how did you know you'd win? How did you know you'd be able to prove your innocence?" I couldn't tell her the truth, that I'd lived this life before, that I'd known exactly what to look for because I'd already seen how it ended. "I didn't know," I said instead, but I knew I had to try because the alternative was accepting defeat, and I wasn't willing to do that. 5 years after my release, Phoenix Consulting had offices in 4 states and a staff of 42 people. We'd helped over 100 people prove their innocence or get their convictions overturned. We'd expanded beyond just wrongful conviction cases. We also took on cases involving police misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, inadequate defense representation. We fought against a criminal justice system that was often more interested in convictions than in truth. I was invited to testify before Congress about criminal justice reform. I spoke about the need for better forensic standards, better training for police and prosecutors, better funding for public defenders. I told my story to senators and representatives, made them understand that wrongful convictions weren't just statistics. They were real people whose lives had been destroyed by a system that was supposed to protect them. The media called me a crusader, an advocate, a voice for the wrongly convicted. Magazines put me on their covers, I won awards, but I never forgot where I'd come from. I never forgot the 60 days in jail, the fear, the desperation. I never forgot that in another life, I'd died in prison, alone and forgotten. Every person Phoenix Consulting helped was a victory not just for them, but for me. Every wrongful conviction we overturned was proof that the truth matters, that justice is possible, that one person can make a difference. 7 years after my release, Melissa came up for parole. She'd served about a third of her sentence and was arguing for early release due to good behavior. I was invited to speak at her parole hearing. Jeff advised me not to go, said it would be better to submit a written statement, but I wanted to be there. I wanted to look her in the eye one more time. The parole hearing was in a small room at FCI Dublin, the same prison where I'd died in my first life. I'd never been back there since my release. Walking through those gates again, even as a visitor, made my skin crawl. Melissa sat at a table with her lawyer. She'd aged terribly. Only 33 years old, but she looked 50. Prison had been hard on her. Her hair was mostly gray now, her face lined, her body thin and frail. When it was my turn to speak, I stood. "My name is Emily Chen," I said. 7 years ago, Melissa Foster tried to destroy my life. She embezzled millions of dollars, framed me for her crimes, and was prepared to let me spend the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. Melissa kept her eyes on the table. She was my best friend. I trusted her with everything, my business, my dreams, my future. She took that trust and used it as a weapon against me. I paused. When I was arrested, I spent 60 days in jail before the truth came out, 60 days of hell. But that was nothing compared to what she tried to do to me. She was willing to let me rot in prison for decades. The parole board was listening intently. I've rebuilt my life since then. I run a successful business helping people who've been wrongly accused. I've helped over 100 people prove their innocence. I've found purpose and peace. But Melissa didn't give me those things. I had to fight for them. I had to claw my way back from the pit she threw me into. I looked directly at Melissa. She served 7 years of a 25-year sentence. That's not nearly enough for what she did. Not just to me, but to all the people she stole from. The clients who trusted us with their retirement savings, her own parents whose retirement fund she embezzled, her sister whose identity she stole. The list goes on. Melissa's lawyer stood. Ms. Chen, my client has expressed remorse. Remorse isn't enough, I said coldly. Remorse doesn't give me back the 60 days I spent in jail. It doesn't erase the trauma of being arrested for a crime I didn't commit. It doesn't undo the damage to my reputation or my mental health. I turned back to the parole board. Melissa Foster is a manipulator and a liar. She spent her entire life taking shortcuts and betraying people who trusted her. 7 years in prison hasn't changed that. If you release her now, she'll do it again. Maybe not fraud, but something, because that's who she is. I sat down. Melissa was denied parole. She'd have to serve at least another 5 years before she could apply again. As I left the building, I felt the weight of the past finally lifting from my shoulders. 10 years after my release, 10 years after I was reborn into this second life, I sat in my office at Phoenix Consulting and reflected on everything that had happened. In my first life, I died in prison at 38, forgotten and alone. In this life, I was 33 years old, successful, respected, free. The difference wasn't luck, it was knowledge. I'd known what to look for, how to fight back, how to prove my innocence. I'd used my second chance not just to save myself, but to build something meaningful. Phoenix Consulting had helped over 200 people prove their innocence or get their convictions overturned. 200 people who'd been wrongly convicted, who'd been betrayed by the system or by people they trusted. I'd given them their lives back. And Melissa, she was still in prison, still paying for her crimes. Some people might say I should forgive her, that holding on to anger would only hurt me. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was victorious. 15 years after my release, I got a call from the prison. Melissa Foster was dying. Lung cancer stage 4. She had maybe 6 months left. She wanted to see me. I should have said no. I should have let her die alone the way she'd let me die alone in my first life. But I was curious, and maybe after all this time, I wanted closure. I drove to FCI Dublin on a gray Tuesday morning. They led me to the prison hospital, a depressing ward that smelled like antiseptic and despair. Melissa was in a bed by the window. She'd aged terribly. She looked 60, not 45. The cancer had ravaged her body, left her skeletal and frail. "Emily," she whispered when she saw me. "You came." "I almost didn't." She nodded weakly. I wouldn't have blamed you." I sat in the chair beside her bed. "Why did you want to see me?" "To apologize. For real this time." She coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I've had a lot of time to think in here. About what I did. About who I was. And who were you?" "A coward. A selfish, greedy coward." Tears slid down her sunken cheeks. "I destroyed the best friendship I ever had because I was too scared to face my own mistakes. I'd been stealing for years from everyone, and I thought I could keep getting away with it. When it all started to unravel, I panicked. And you were there, vulnerable and grieving, and I thought I could use that. You did use it." "I know." She reached out with a trembling hand. "I'm sorry, Emily. I'm so, so sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I need you to know that I've regretted it every single day. Every single day." I looked at her hand but didn't take it. "In my darkest moments in here," Melissa continued, "I've wished I could go back and make different choices. That I could be the friend you deserved. That I could have stopped myself before I destroyed everything. I thought about my first life. About dying shackled to a hospital bed, alone and forgotten. about the bitterness that had consumed me. You can't go back, I said. None of us can. We can only go forward with the choices we've made. I know, but I wanted you to know. She coughed again, harder this time. A nurse appeared, checked her monitors, adjusted her IV. When we were alone again, Melissa's voice was even weaker. I wanted you to know that you didn't deserve what I did to you. You were a good friend, and I threw that away. If I could change anything, it would be that. I stood up. I have to go. Will you? She hesitated. Will you come back? Before the end? I looked at her, this shell of a person who'd once been my best friend, who'd tried to destroy my life. No, I said. I don't think I will. Melissa nodded, more tears falling. I understand. I walked to the door, then unpaused. Melissa? Yes? In another life, you won. You succeeded in framing me. I went to prison for your crimes. I spent 15 years behind bars for something I didn't do. I died here in a place like this, alone and forgotten. She stared at me, confused. But that's not this life. In this life, I fought back. I proved my innocence. I won, and you lost everything. Emily, I'm not telling you this to be cruel. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about truth. You tried to bury the truth and it buried you instead. I opened the door. Goodbye, Melissa. I never saw her again. She died 3 months later. I didn't go to the funeral. 20 years after my arrest, Phoenix Consulting had offices in 12 states and a team of over 80 people. We'd helped over 500 people prove their innocence or get their convictions overturned. I was invited to the White House to receive an award for my work in criminal justice reform. The president shook my hand and called me a hero. I smiled for the cameras, gave a gracious speech, and accepted the award. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd been given an impossible gift, a second chance at life, and had used it to not just save herself, but to save others. That night, alone in my hotel room, I thought about Melissa, about the choice she'd made that set everything in motion, about how one act of betrayal had led to 2 decades of consequences. I wondered sometimes if she'd really been sorry in the end or if she'd just been scared of dying alone. I'd never know, but it didn't matter because I'd forgiven her, not for her sake, for mine. Forgiveness didn't mean what she'd done was okay. It didn't erase the trauma or the pain. But it meant I was choosing to let go of the bitterness that had consumed me in my first life. I was choosing to be free. Now, at 43, I sit in my office and look at the wall of photos. 517 people who've gotten their lives back because of Phoenix Consulting. 517 people who might have spent decades in prison for crimes they didn't commit. In my first life, I was just a number. Inmate number 84759, forgotten. In this life, I'm Emily Chen, founder and CEO of Phoenix Consulting, advocate for the wrongly accused, author of 3 books on criminal justice reform, mother to twin girls, Maya and Sophie, adopted 5 years ago from foster care, wife to Daniel, a public defender I met at a criminal justice conference who shares my passion for helping people. I have a life, a real, full, beautiful life. And somewhere in a cemetery in San Francisco, there's a grave with Melissa Foster's name on it. No one visits it. Her parents died while she was in prison. Her sister moved to Australia and changed her name. Melissa died alone, unmourned, forgotten. In my first life, that would have been me. But I got a second chance, and I used it to become something more than a victim. I became a survivor, a fighter, a force for justice. And that, in the end, was the best revenge of all.